with today's guest, Sanam Andalini, MBE. Hi, Sanam.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to have you today. So let me introduce my guest. Sanam is a visionary peace strategist and the driving force behind the International Civil Society Action Network, also known as ICANN. With decades of experience navigating global conflicts, if I can say the word, she's a beacon of hope, inspiring a generation to take action and build a brighter future. From her groundbreaking work on UN Security Council Resolution 1325 to her tireless efforts supporting women's rights and peace building initiatives worldwide, Sanam is a true pioneer. Her passion for empowering women and her unwavering belief in the power of human connection make her a truly remarkable leader. I'm so excited for you to listen to this conversation today. So let's delve into her inspiring journey and explore the future of peace, justice, and human flourishing, because that's what we're all about, right? It's
Thank
quite
you.
amazing when I read the bios.
Yeah,
So,
I don't necessarily recognize myself. I mean, I recognize
yeah.
what I tried to do, but then I look at the state of the world and my mother often says to me, ever since you got involved in this stuff, the world's gotten worse. So it kind of brings me down to earth.
It was so let's start with the story then. What inspired you to dedicate your life to peace building and what keeps you hopeful for the future, especially with the chaotic world at the moment and the global challenges we face?
It's a very good question. So, I I was 11 when the Iranian Revolution happened. And we went to watch. I mean, nobody could have imagined the outcomes. And I remember at the time, I would ask my parents, I was like, what are we for? What is this about? Like what? And I remember my mother saying, we want an honest and just government. And, age 11, I was like, that sounds good to me. Why not? Anyway, we watched, went to see these protests, and it was a sea. I mean, there was millions and millions of people out on the streets. It was peaceful in the run up to when the Shah of Iran left the country, right? Um, and by that time, we had come away for a 10-day vacation. My sister and I were sent with my aunt and uncle. They were going to France, and our school was closed, everything was shut down, and we said, can we go with them? And they said yes. And then we ended up in France, and by January of 79, the airport was closed in Tehran. And so they came to London. And they brought us along, and it was meant to be a week. And then it was like, well, why don't we go to school until Easter? And before you know it, it was Easter in summer, and things got worse. And I didn't return to Iran for 7 years after that. I went back in actually yes, in 1987. My father came out once or twice in early 79, but then he wasn't allowed out of the country in December of 79. I didn't see him for 7 years. So our lives, literally, it was like one life ended and this other life began. And I say this because it's been the touchstone for me in so many ways around what happens when your country is going through conflict, political conflict of some sort. And how, for most people watching, if they know anything about it, it's just an incident in the news. It's history. For us, it was every decade of our lives have been affected by this. The change is still affecting me, my children, and so forth. And in my 20s, at some point, I realized that I'd been interested in journalism and maybe becoming a war correspondent. But I worked in newsrooms at the BBC and at CNN, and I realized that they watch the news. They're not shaping it. They're not changing it. In fact, I remember images of genocide in Rwanda, and I was like, how can you have a camera and people are, macheteing others to death, and you're not doing anything about it? It kind of resonates right now with what's happening in Gaza and how we watch it on our phones.
Right, right.
But so it propelled me into thinking, I want to be involved in how you stop that. I want others not to go through what I went through. Other countries in the Middle East that had dictatorships and so forth. I started working in that field here in England. There was an organization called International Alert. I got a job there and started working there. And all of a sudden I realized, my God, we were lucky, because I had a colleague from Rwanda, and she
right.
had lived through the genocide and survived it. And we were working on what was going on in Burundi and in Sri Lanka. And I became immersed in this universe of the wars of the post-Cold War era, these civil wars, and just how intractable they become. And they get kids involved, and women are being raped. And it's not some battlefield out there, it's in people's homes. And while we were looking at these issues and thinking about things like, well, if there was early warning, our governments would respond. And so we did a lot of work on early warning. And we had a colleague who came in from the Congo, and he said, the war is going to start in Kivu in 6 weeks' time. And he was right. And so I was like, well, obviously, even if we have the warnings, nobody's doing anything about it. Who is? Who actually steps up? And the minute you start looking at from that lens, you start looking at the local level. And what we saw and what we discovered in the conversations that we had was that as women, we were thinking about these issues in very practical ways, not systems and theory, and like, who the hell steps up, right? And it was like putting on a pair of glasses and seeing the world from the lens of real people, ordinary people, mothers, sisters, daughters, whatever, who see these things happening. And because they're women, at the beginning, they have a bit more protection than the men. This is quite interesting. Women hide the men. Women can go out, and in the first instance, they go out and protest. They don't get beaten up, or they don't get arrested in the same way that, say, teenage men and teenage boys do. So we started seeing this, and it's a long story. We had a conference in 1998. Women came from 50 countries around the world, and it was like, wow, this is something really serious, and we need to bring it and elevate this experience to a global level. Policies, the UN and so forth. And one of my colleagues remembers that I said, well, if Al Gore can go to the Security Council, so can we. I think Al Gore had gone to the Security Council in 98 with HIV/AIDS as a threat to peace and security. And I was like, well, Security Council isn't able to deal with these civil wars. They don't have the mandate. The women can help them. So that was kind of the story of how I kind of got involved in this work, and continue to just be inspired by the women I work with.
It's interesting the way that you talked about when you worked for, as a journalist, and we tend to be quite desensitized, don't we? We see this happening. We see it happening on the news. We hear about it. But unfortunately, it's part of the human condition that if we don't actually experience it, we can't reconcile with it. It just seems it's happening at a distance. And because we see so much of it, and it's on movies, and it's on, it's in video games, and it's everywhere. And we just become so desensitized to all of it. It's difficult, isn't it? It's a difficult situation because of that.
It's really difficult. Because it's really hard to put yourself in those shoes. I mean,
Right.
To this day, I have colleagues who've lost their children, and who have taken that pain and somehow found it in their hearts, in their souls, in their spirit, to say, I've had this loss. I'm going to work so that somebody else doesn't have the same loss. I mean, that's an extraordinary characteristic to have, right? I would never want to even imagine myself in that situation. And I've always said, I don't know what I would do am I going to get depressed? Am I going to get angry? Who knows, right? So it's really hard to imagine it. But I think when we think about the media, the problem I have with them is that they don't cover this side of the story, right? So in all the years that I was growing up here in England, the Northern Ireland Troubles, we heard about the Troubles, right? Or the Bosnian conflict. There was never a story about how Catholic and Protestant women in Northern Ireland were working at the community level, how they were doing the internal negotiations, coming to the table, and actually shaped the entire direction of the Good Friday Agreement, and in terms of how they dealt with education, how they dealt with prison reform, how they dealt with police reform. We never hear the story of this other side of the story of people who are living in peace, working for peace, trying to preserve peace, even when a war is raging. And it's a phenomenal story. right? And I'm running a podcast now saying it's called If You Were in Charge.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about
we'll
that
come to
later.
that because this is what I'm interested in. It's the people that are solving problems and giving them the platform.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I know let's just say the Second World War, for example, I know all the men went off to war and it was the women that stayed and literally took control of the country. They kept the country going. The women, they were the one that cleaned up the mess. They were the healthcare workers. They were the ones that took care of the food supplies, everything. So even going back to then, it was the women that, that kept the country going, basically, for want of a better word. So
they were also doing a lot of the intelligence work, and they were also spies. Like, we're only now getting the stories of the women who were really incredible spies on both sides, by the way. But because they were women, nobody took them seriously. There's a certain power that comes out of that weakness, or that sort of, we
fly under the radar, don't we, Sanam? So how can we shift our focus from analyzing problems to taking the action and creating positive change, even in hopeless situations? How can we do that?
I think it's a very interesting question, because I think what I try to do, at least what I've learned, is that I look to see where I sat, what my skills were, what tools or what power or what leverage I had at my hands, right? So I was working at a British-based organization. We were working, reaching out and working with women around the world on these issues. My skill, ironically, was that I'm a good writer. And I had been in marketing before that, like as a very young person, that my first job had been in. So I was like, oh, if we want to do advocacy to get a Security Council resolution, I didn't know the laws. Like, I didn't know whether you get to speak to Security Council members. I was like, this is a good idea. We have to do it. How do I get through the barriers? And so, we would go to events and I'd have colleagues who came from places like Macedonia. They'd never been to an international conference. And I was like, well, you should be on stage speaking, and I was like, oh, I'll go talk to the American ambassador and the British, whatever. And let's make this happen, kind of thing. So I kind of believe that once you know and have a sense of the vision of what you're trying to achieve, and then you look at it and you say, okay, what can I do? What are the steps that I can take, right? I might not be able to go to Gaza right now and, stand in the middle of wherever it is, on the border doing anything. But if I can be a voice here, if I can open a door, if I can bring somebody else along with me, or help tell their story, or raise money to give it to them, then I'll do it. And that's really been my approach. And the acronym of my organization is ICAN, is what can I do? Right.
That's exactly. I love that. I love that as well. It's
very simple.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We had, I tell you, my colleagues from around the world, I'd done research and written about all these things, thinking that, once we have recommendations, once we have a policy, the government will take it up, the UN will take it up. And they didn't. So then my colleagues were like, well, we need an organization where it's our network. So I said, okay, I'll create the organization and we'll have a network. And then it was like, well, people aren't getting enough resources. So I went to the governments and I said, you say you support women, but you're not giving them the money. And they said, oh, well, we can't do these small grants. I said, okay, I'll set up a fund. And so I set up a fund, and we've now distributed over $11 million in the last 10 years. Wow. in 30 countries, right?
Wow.
It's these ways. And then one of the biggest things that happened was in 2021, when the Afghan crisis happened. We'd been saying, please bring Afghan women to the tables. Don't let the Taliban steamroll you. And they did. And then there's the pullout from Afghanistan. And all the Afghans that we knew were at high risk, and they were emailing and texting us saying, help. And I have a small team there. Most of them are very young. And I thought, what can we do? And I said to my team, what we're going to try and do is we're going to respond to everyone who texts us, so that we say we're here. We can't promise anything. I'm not an evacuation, organization. And let's see what we can do. So we started collating their information and who they were and their families and so forth. and liaising with the governments that we worked with and figuring out, are there planes coming out of Afghanistan, and who's, can we get people we got a bunch of people to Mexico, raised money and got them to Mexico for a bit. But eventually we helped about 1,100 people leave the country. It was mainly women-led families, or people who were members of families where the women had been, community activists, journalists, peace builders. Some were lawyers, some were police officers, and at the, and to now we're still trying to help. But it was when I started, I was like, I don't know. Well, maybe we can help one person. What can
Exactly. You just start with the one, right? Let's just start with one. It has a knock-on effect, and then
you say, oh, here's another. And then look, somebody else is. Yeah. So there's something about the sort of belief in what you should do and thinking about it, but maybe not overthinking.
It's overwhelming, isn't it? Sometimes the situation. It's like, what can I do? I'm just one person. There's like, 1,000 people here or more. What can I do? And it's just about focusing. Stay focused. Just help the one person. Start with the one, and then and build it from there. Yeah. That's a great answer. So let's talk about empowering women, because obviously the women's rights and the empowerment movement, there are restrictions, obviously a lot of restrictions in some countries. You and I are glad that we are happy where we live, and we do have some rights. So what are the most effective ways that we can support women's rights and empowering women, especially in regions where their rights are severely restricted?
So what I've tried to do is I've always tried to find the women who have self-empowered in wherever it is, whether it's in Afghanistan right now, where we support work, in Yemen, in Colombia, in Nigeria, Boko Haram affected areas. So there's always someone.
Yeah, they're there, aren't they? They are there. There are women that are standing up, and I see that.
And they don't. It's not the ones that have a PhD or a political label, or, sometimes it's the school teacher who knows everything. Right. Sometimes it's the social worker. I have a colleague in Yemen. She was a poet and she worked for a private company. And she's, when the Yemen war broke out, she started by saying, well, kids have cancer. We need to get them out. And then, this community is not getting enough bread and they're starving. We need to start bakeries. They come from all walks of life, and the issue is to first find them. It's like finding the helpers, right? And then saying, how do I help them do more than they can do? And sometimes, I sometimes step away from the word empowerment, because I think they're more powerful than I have. They have a hell of a lot more courage than most of us do, right?
Exactly.
If you're standing up and working in the context of the Taliban right now, I don't know many, English people, let alone people in politics, who would have the guts to do that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily empowerment; it's recognition. It's being able to look at someone and say, you are extraordinary. What you're doing is inspiring me, and it is unbelievable. And I just want to give you a hug, first of all, to say this. And I want to help you be the best of what you can be, right? Mm-hmm. It's kind of, it's almost like talent spotting. I don't really know how else to say it.
Absolutely. And I've seen some TED Talks where they've introduced some of these women that have done some extraordinary things, like teachers, and they've got the students to, the females in the class to actually write down things that they are empowering words, inspiring words and visions, and they've put them on the walls in the classroom. They've kept it very private. It's in the classroom. They've not gone out on the road and run down the road, but they've kept it, and one step at a time, one person at a time, one classroom at a time, we can get there. It was inspiring for me to watch that TEDx talk, and I can't remember the name.
And this is what we've seen in our network, that we started, first we brought people that I'd worked with from different countries to see, if you're working in Iraq and you meet a Pakistani, like, what does it like? What are the similarities of experience, context, and so forth, and building the relationships. And one of the things that we've seen over the years, we've been doing this now for 15, 20 years, is that peace building isn't something that everybody knows about, right? And it's not something that most people, most women even, step into, right? You might do women's rights and livelihoods and,
Equal
even
pay,
like,
equal pay.
exactly,
Stuff,
equal
yeah.
pay, exactly. But to say, hey, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to face the militia that is coming towards my community, right? Or I'm going to go and talk to the local police station, the place where when sometimes women go, they are being raped and harassed, or that when they come and they arrest my son and so forth, I'm going to go and talk to them and build a relationship with them, right? It's not everybody has.
That's extraordinary courage, isn't it?
And so when we find, if I have colleagues in Kenya and I'm like, okay, this is extraordinary work, and then I connect them with my colleagues in Colombia and, as I say, in Nigeria, and so it becomes like an alternative family. It's a global family, and I have a very large family, so we have all sorts of people. But it's this idea of creating a safe space so that people can see that they're not alone in the work that they're doing, and then they get inspired by each other, and it becomes like a sort of a movement and an orchestra. And for me, sitting where I sit, which is kind of having the privilege of living in England or in America when I was, is that I'm not dealing with their crises on a daily basis as they are, right? So, but I'm able to say, oh yeah, look at in Pakistan, they're doing this extraordinary work. How about connecting that with what is happening in Nigeria and seeing where the similarities are, and then bringing that up and saying to the UK government or at the UN or whatever, this isn't just a one-off, one-person story. This is something that is universal.
Yeah.
It's women across the world, different cultures, different times. It happens all the time, though. And so there's something here that we need to support.
Yeah, so you've stepped into that role of looking at the bigger picture, and you can connect the dots, and you can connect these people, and you can make a bigger impact by doing that, right? Is that wonderful?
That's for years I would joke that when there were like these drop down boxes about what is your profession, my profession didn't. I was like, well, what am I? I don't really know. And then I was asking my colleagues, and I said,
multi-talented.
Yeah, no, it's sort of, and one of my, I said, am I a peace builder? And my colleague said, no, I'm a peace builder. I work on the ground. I'm a peace builder. You're a strategist. You're a peace strategist. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. I'm trying to do change here and I'm trying to do change there. And I'm thinking about the big picture. And then I see what they're doing and the value. So it's a strange title to sort of create, but it's like, we have war strategists, why not be a peace strategist? I wish there were more of us in this world.
Right. Well, we do have lots of those, don't we? We do have lots of war strategists, don't we? And we understand what's happening. That's the result we can see with our eyes, right? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the war and the conflict, because you've witnessed some firsthand in your life. So can you share some stories of hope and resilience from the communities that you've worked with? Expand a little bit. We've talked a little bit about them.
It's so I see, my work has allowed me to go into communities and work with women, or through the women that I work with, meet others in their communities, very, very grassroots. And at the same time, because I did some work with the UN, I've also been involved in the sort of negotiations in Somalia at some point, and planning for Syria and so forth. And what strikes me everywhere I've been, whenever I've been engaged with whether it's generals or Taliban leaders, or like in Liberia, I was talking to these young men who'd been militias for 10 years of their lives. They were 24 and they'd been recruited when they were 14 years old. I mean, that's all they knew. Or even gang members in Jamaica. What I've learned and what I do in my work is I try to see their humanity. This is one of the things that peace builders often do, right? It's to get through the labels of you are militant, you are government, you are, I don't know, terrorist, you are whatever, and say, actually, what happened to you? And who do you care about? What do you want? Do you have children? Often this is a really useful entry point. What do you want for your kids? How did you get involved in this? What makes you afraid? You were a rebel with a big gun, and now someone's taken the gun from you. What are you worried about, right? And this ability to sort of engage, I think, is a really magical kind of way of connecting. It's really important in life generally. But what's fascinating about it is that because I am 5'5.5" and beige skinned and nowadays older than I was, when I first started this work, I'm not threatening to any of them. And that lack of being a threat is the greatest power you can have, because it's kind of disarming, right? And then you start talking on a human level, and if they're young, they think they're talking to their mother or their grandmother at this point. If they're older, or if I was with my UN label, it was like, oh, I'm talking to somebody who works at the UN, but oh, she's Muslim. I sometimes wear my Allah, or oh, she's from Iran, she's different. So I was like, okay, there's a variety of identities that I have. Which one allows me to connect?
Right.
And then what am I getting? And anytime I've done that, it's amazing what people come out with.
What a skill to have.
People want a life of dignity. They want, they'll say, I want my children to go to school. I want to be able to have a nice home. I want to sleep safe at night, right? It is, I want to be cultural. I don't want another culture to come and tell me what to do, right? And it's like, okay, we're not talking about that, because so often when you say women, they think it's Western feminism, whatever that is, that comes with. Right. I'm like, I'm not talking about that. I'm saying, look at the women in your own society. But it's at the core of it, people want dignity.
Right.
And they want just a modicum of, food, water, housing, family.
Basic things, right? Just basic things.
Opportunity for their children. Spoken about this before, but there's a Jamaican gang member, and we were standing in this sort of lot, just an empty lot, in one of the neighborhoods in Kingston with a bunch of these guys, and some of them had bullet holes and stuff. And I asked one of them, I said, what do you want for your children? And he said, I want them to have good table manners and good education and speak well. And I was like, me too. And then I was like, oh my God, I'm empathizing with some guy who has an M16 under his bed. But but isn't
it funny when you break it down?
When you break it
down,
yeah,
we all just basically want the same things. We're just fighting in different ways. But society, we're very good at labeling and putting people in boxes, and like you said, the different,
and allowing, whether it's political leaders, religious leaders, business leaders, allowing them to co-opt messages and then turn people against each other. And this is, I sometimes say, if I had a magic, some kind of thing that I could open up, I would literally go to all of these often young men who have been recruited or forced into fighting, or they think they're fighting for this army or that militia, and say to them, look at where your leaders are sitting.
Yeah.
Look at what's happening to them, and look at what they're making you do.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah.
Still all about divide and conquer, isn't it? And I think this is where women in peace building, we're better, because men are very much divide and conquer, they, them,
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because women will, we will take on those divisions, right? Whether it's religious or community or whatever but the minute you sit together as women, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you're a mom, I'm a mom too. And what do you, and you've got, are you getting, I don't know, whether it's violence, there's so many things that bring us together around our identity as women, which is much stronger than whether you're Christian and I'm Muslim, or the other person's Jewish or Buddhist or whatever they might be.
We're all women.
Yeah.
We don't really care. We see beyond that, don't we?
And you could do the same thing with men, but men don't talk to each other in this way.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, right? So let's talk about women in leadership roles. So why is it crucial? I love this question. Why is it crucial to have more women in leadership roles, especially in peace building and conflict resolution? Because of these unique perspectives and skills that women do bring to the table, right?
Yeah. So one of the things in the research I've done over the years, I would ask women, what's the difference? Or I would ask men, what's the difference by having these women there, right? And I remember a South African woman who was their high commissioner to the UK, but she'd been part of the anti-apartheid movement. And she gave a really good answer. She said, you know, the women come to the table and they have these skills that they've learned in their other spaces, in their domestic sphere. They've had to deal with kids that are sick or elderly or people that are grumpy at home and things. And they've learned how to mediate and how to calm things down and how to kind of build trust. They brought those skills to the negotiation table and they've learned how to listen, right? And her point wasn't that we are born with these skills. Her point was that we acquire skills through life in different settings. And if you are honest about it, and then you bring it into these spaces of negotiations and you draw on those skills, it can make a big difference. And being aware of that, right? So what I find sometimes is that we're trying to say, you know, a woman leader has to be hawkish like the men, you know, like be tough and we go to war. And I'm like, why?
Well, unfortunately, that does happen in the corporate industry. Women do have to put those big boots on and you know and join the masculine energy, but it doesn't end well most of the time.
Most of the time, and what it does is it creates a hierarchy. We get the handful of alpha women who buy into that, and they and the rest of us are going, that's not really what I want to be. That's not really what I like, and we come, you know. And so my thing is that maybe my generation, because people ask me, who are your role models? And I was like, it was really hard to find a role model of somebody who thought like me, who was comfortable in their skin as a person of color or whatever you want to call it, but also saying, I want to be a full-time mom and I want to do my work, right? Like, how do I do all this? And I'm like, I hope that by being present, and this, going to your point about leadership and representation, is that sometimes simply by being there and showing that you look like the younger women and that you're saying certain things that are different, that in and of itself can inspire others to feel that they also are not being crazy. Like it's not, and that to me is very important, that it's a representation matters, voice matters, perspective matters, speaking truth to power really matters.
Well, I think you didn't have a role model, but you've created that role model. You are now the role model.
It's strangely so, yes.
Right.
Again, I don't, my children bring me down to earth, but I hope so. I hope that I inspire others, and I hope that they're building from where I've been, and learning from some of the. I sometimes think, like, what are the mistakes? How would I have done it differently? And it's part of what I'm hoping to do in the next year. I want to start writing about these things and just reflecting on what was my experience as I fumbled through some of the stuff.
As we do, that's what life's all about, right? It's about just taking the next step and the next step. There's no really right or wrong. It's just, well, okay, that didn't work out, but I'll just try it differently, or I'll do this now, right? Yeah. So let's talk about your podcast, right?
Thank you.
So what inspired you to create that If You Were in Charge podcast? How do you hope it will inspire listeners to think about the world's problems?
It's kind of fits in with what we've been saying. What I realized, so two things. One is that I get really exhausted when I hear people analyze problems and kind of just sink us in this, and there's this, and and then there's climate, and then there's conflict, and then you're just like, and your head just goes like this, and you say, I want to, I don't know, go read a comic. But I mean, literally, I'm like,
right?
Yeah, right. Emily in Paris or something, whatever. So I find that really draining. And also I feel that level of pessimism is a privilege. We can sit here in England and have very erudite conversations about the problems in the world. Fundamentally, we're a rich country. Fundamentally, we're going to be kind of okay. Or generationally, it's like we're going to be gone by the time the problems come, right? So I really push back against pessimism. I really don't like this sort of sinking yourself into the problem. That was one side of kind of what I was thinking. The other side was that in my work, I come across amazing people who are picking up these big problems and trying to do something about it. Right. It's like, and it's kind of partly like, if I were in charge, I would do this. And if I were the foreign minister, and if I were, the UN, envoy for such and such. So I was like, imagine giving people who are really at the forefront of dealing with big problems the ability to say, okay, your head is down here and you're taking that one step at a time kind of process. But what if I lifted your head and said, there's the mountain you're trying to climb?
Right.
What else could you do? What else would you do? Right.
Right.
And
Right.
it's been a really fun, I mean, it's been a really energizing series of conversations that I've had, because what people are doing is extraordinary and it's really moving. And then when I ask them what will you do more if you were in charge, so many of them are giving me really practical solutions, right? It's not inconceivable. It's
Right.
genuine. It's like, in Palestine, I spoke with Mohammed Darwasha, who's a peace activist, and he said education matters. And he said, oh, if I
Yeah.
had I said, if you were a billionaire, he goes, oh my God, I just need, less money than it costs one missile. I need, 7,000 new teachers, right?
Right.
Like, so they're giving us really practical solutions to these problems that, again, the media and the politics around us keeps telling us is intractable, and it's not. They're actually resolvable.
Yeah. Very good.
So
So
yeah,
it's inspiring then, isn't it, to talk to people, isn't it?
it's
I
inspiring. Yeah, I mean,
find it
you do the
wonderful.
same.
I
Yeah,
find it
you're doing.
wonderful. Honestly, it brings me so much joy, these podcasts, interviews, the women I speak to, it just empowers me,
Yeah,
and inspires me, the stories.
and
So,
each story, it kind of you become like a collector of stories,
yeah,
right?
I
So
know.
they see you, and then you tell their story somewhere else,
I
and
know.
especially as women, I've tried hard to make sure that the podcast is, the majority of my guests are women, but I obviously have some really good guys as well, and but it's mainly because we don't have the time to sit and write and tell our stories, and even when we do.
We rarely tell our stories anyway. We're not very good at, men are very good at just saying what they've done and talking about their achievements. Women are very humble about things, when you actually talk to them, you're like, oh, you've done this and this and this. And then, oh, really? You've done all of those things? People never talk about it, right?
Yeah.
We're
Well,
very,
it's funny because over the, as I say, I look back and I'm like, oh my God, what did I do with my life? I'm now 57. So I'm like, what was I doing? I missed a lot of birthday parties and weddings and, all sorts of family and friends, kind of social life things. But one of the things that I laugh about is that part of the reason why it's hard to sort of feel that inflated about yourself is that I'd come home to my kids and they bring you right back to ground. And I was speaking at a meeting once in New York at the UN. It was a big conference with, I don't know, 60, 70 women in the room about leadership and stuff. I lifted my arm and all down the side of my sweater was glitter glue. I'd put my hand and I was like, as grand as I'm supposed to be here, at the end of the day, I've got glitter glue.
I love
you
that
know,
story. That really brought you down to grounded you, right? Totally
it
grounded you
grounds
in the
us.
moment. Yeah.
And also you realize it's grounding. And at the end of the day, those kids that we are raising are the future. And so
That's
it
right.
is important that they are doing well and that we're keeping an eye on them. And whatever
Yeah.
we're doing, very much for me, I'm doing it for them because I feel my generation owes the next generation
Yeah, that's
some
how I
piece
feel
of
too.
security that we've had.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the women I interview are Gen Xers like me, and we're all trying to, inspire, motivate the next generation because that's what we're here to do. And that's all.
Yeah.
If that's all you can do, that's all you can do. But that's what a great
It's
thing to do.
I think it's this. I honestly think that when we started, I didn't think that we were breaking any new ground. I was like,
Right.
of course, I'm a woman, I'm doing this, right? And then you suddenly realize, oh my God, I'm trying to break this. And then now when I meet people, I think, well, okay, I broke. It's like you're thrashing through some jungle and you think you've opened a path. And in some cases you have. But in other cases, you think, nope, it's all grown up, it's all overgrown again. And I've still got another generation who's still feeling kind of cowed or hasn't stepped into the space or they're not being given the same recognition that they deserve. So yeah, so we keep going and we have to keep drawing them with us.
Yeah, I think a lot of the younger generation, the millennials, and maybe maybe not the Gen Z, but the millennials I've spoken to, they're all looking to make that bigger impact on the world, and we've done it by default. Really, we really didn't. We were just trying to do something. We didn't really realize it was that, but they've put it into words. What's my purpose? I want to make a bigger impact on the world. And we're like, oh, and you're doing that. Am I? Am I? Am I? Okay, I suppose I am.
You
Right?
know, that's a really interesting point, Beth, because I sometimes think about it and I'm like, yeah, you hear these, it's like, I want to do this and I want to do that. And I'm like, at some point you just got to get on with it. Right. And the getting on with it is hard work and it's nothing glamorous and it's not, it's just doing the doing. Right. So it's almost like between their approach of, wow, I want to do something, and our like squirreling away until we've done something. Right.
Yeah.
There's going to be some happy medium.
There's a happy medium there, right?
Yeah, some happy medium. And I hope that the next generation, Gen Z, which is my kids, I kind of see them figuring this out a little bit because they have a sort of a disdain in a way for the institutions, and they're like they have a fundamental mistrust of some, and they understand that they have a different power. Whether it's in the States around like gun violence, where they're like, if the laws aren't going to change, we're going to lobby the stores and the shops that sell bullets,
right,
and pressure them to stop selling the bullets, right? So it's very interesting, or the climate change, with Greta and others. It's quite interesting how they're trying to sort of have their impact. But at some level, the devil is in the detail, and it's just that nitty gritty kind of, boring.
So we're talking about the younger generation. So it's a perfect segue to go into how do you involve the younger generations in peace building and social justice movements, and what role are they going to play in the future, do you think?
So in our network, so the ICANN network is called the Women's Alliance for Security and Leadership, WASL, which in Urdu and Swahili and all these languages, it means to connect. And our network we have members in 43 countries. There are about 100 organizations, but many of them are local networks themselves. And so they reach down really deep into their own communities. And one of the things that we've done is we've said, okay, we want to get recognition for women who do peace building work. What do you think you need to do in your country? And they've developed their own campaigns, and they go out and they talk to people. And in that way, they bring younger people into the mix. So in Uganda, they've done boot camps, and they bring young women and young men to talk about, okay, here's the International Security Council resolution, and it talks about local initiatives and resolving disputes and stopping violence. And then they look at it and say, well, what's going on in your community? And somebody might say, we have a land dispute, or we have elections, and during elections the politicians get violent, or we have a sort of a slum area and there are gangs in the area. And these young people themselves use these tools to adapt it to their local context, and then they go out and they do the work. And again, the more they do, the more respect they are given. Right. Because all of a sudden they're coming into, I don't know, family land dispute, or a land dispute between this family and that. And they might be 25 years old, but they've learned the skills, and they come in and they start mediating. And as it's like the rest of us, the more you do, the more you're like, oh, I can do this. Right. Let me go on. So that's part of it, that question of sort of how do we bring the young in? Another part of it is making sure that when we gather, we give the opportunity for young people to be in the conversations with those of us who are older.
I think that's so important, isn't it? Involve them in the conversations. We tend to have governments that are very outdated, very old, and we need some younger people in there to have conversations together. This is the way we think. Well, this is the way it's always been done. Yeah, but there might be a different way. How do we,
Yeah. And bringing them along. So my own team, we have. I'm the oldest, and then we have some that are a couple that are in their 40s, and a couple, a few that are. We're only a team of 12, but this question of saying, okay, I might get invited to some reception. I don't know, governmental reception for International Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women, or some event. And if often I'll say, can I bring my colleague along, right? Or I can't go. Can she go instead of me, right? Because I've been to these things, and I'm like, well, let them go and let them represent the organization, let them learn, let them build their own relationships with others, right? It's creating that space, and then coming back and being able to say, okay, or before you go, it's like, what, we're going to this meeting, what do we need to do here and there, and so forth. But kind of in real time being able to say, okay, this is why I'm doing this, or this is why I want you to go to that meeting. But it's giving them opportunity. It's creating the opportunities and allowing for that to happen. Sometimes one of the things that I've learned is that it's important to be explicit about it, because I was doing it for a long time and assuming that when I say everybody, we're doing a team meeting and we're going to discuss, I don't know, strategy or budget or whatever, I assumed that people understood that this was part of their professional development.
Right.
And then I realized that they're kind of sitting there going, what am I doing here? And I was like, okay, you are here because I want you to hear about this conversation, or consulting you because I'm curious about your idea about whatever it is. So trying to practice also what we preach around.
I suppose it's a bit like a parent-child situation, wouldn't it? At some point, you've got to step back and you've got to allow them some freedom to, well, you go and do that. Really?
Yeah.
I can do that, right? You allow them that freedom and space to forge their own connections and find their own path on this journey.
My kids when they were little, I've got twins, so when they were little,
double trouble.
I remember they would say, I don't know, we'd be out walking in the street and they're like, why is such and such, and my first response to them was to say, well, why do you think? Just to understand, okay, I don't know, you've looked at the tree and the leaves have fallen, or they haven't fallen on one, and just to see, like, in their head, how are they thinking about something? So then I could start from there and talk to them. But I think that's, these are all these, as you say, it's like these ways in which we say, you go do and come back, or you tell me what you think and then come back. You try it. It's harder in the sense that, like everything else, it's easier to do it for them, but it's better, I think.
I think that's a Gen X fault. We want to fix everybody. We want to make everything right. Seems to be the way. So tell me about, on this journey, have you made any personal sacrifices? You talked a little bit about you've missed birthdays and weddings and stuff. So what type of sacrifices have you made to pursue this journey for peace building?
So I think for sure on the kind of social life. I mean, when I was living, now I'm back in England, but when I was living in the States, so often I was traveling a lot for work. And by the time you're trying to get across the Atlantic to wherever, it takes 2 days. So often my travel would be either going on a Saturday night, leaving on a Saturday to get somewhere on a Sunday and then start working on a Monday, or leaving on a Friday and getting home on a Saturday. Right. That I was absent weekends. I would arrange, and then when I was there, I was with my kids, right? So this idea of saying, oh, you have friends. Before all this, it was like you have your groups of friends and you do stuff together, right? And after a while, well, you're never there. So they forget about you. Right?
So you've got to have a good support network, haven't you? When you
So it becomes, a lot of people complain about all the tech that we have now, and I'm like, no, I'm really glad that I have my best friends on WhatsApp and I can be anywhere in the world at any time of night and just say hi. I'm wherever it is, but
I'm still here. I'm still alive.
So I think that's definitely one aspect. I think that there is an interesting kind of tension between thinking of your career as you and what's best for you, and thinking about trying to build an organization and a movement and sort of bringing others with you. So if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to, go build something, you go together. But this idea that there is your own kind of career and what positions that we could take, going to become director of this, that, and the other in different organizations, big institutions, or saying, I'm going to build something else. I'm going to build something new. And it has financial implications. It has recognition implications. It has all these other aspects to it. But now that I'm looking back, my hope is that as I think about kind of the organization that I founded and the work that I've done, that my success will be able to do the succession planning so that somebody else can come and do the daily running, and it will sustain, and it won't be there just because of me. Right. So I've created something that can last. And, of course, it's like thinking about how strategically how you do that and what my role is and so forth. But that issue of, if you've created an organization and you're trying to deepen the bench of many other people doing this kind of work, it means you're sacrificing your own career, whatever trajectory if you want. But it's fine. I don't, I don't really mind that. I think, and I've been lucky. I've over the years, I've done when I teach when I can. I love teaching. I was in and out of the UN, which I used to, I loved when I was able to do it, even though sometimes it just felt like I was banging my head against a brick wall. And I'm just like, you create and you come up with ideas and you try and do a little bit of what you like and a lot of what other people expect you to do.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? It's some of the sacrifices that we make. And I know being an entrepreneur and going on my own journey. I'm building a community now, but it's taken a while to get there, and you just do it one step at a time, don't you?
Yeah.
Right?
It's you have to, right? And sometimes it feels as if you're just treading water, doesn't it? Do you feel like, what have I done?
Sometimes it's just like, am I going the right way? I sometimes question myself. Am I doing the right thing? Am I going the right way? It's all about being, I think we're all becoming a bit more self-aware. I think that's really nice. We're all becoming a bit more self-aware of what we're doing and the impact we're having on the world and the planet. And we're all becoming, I think, it has a knock-on effect, doesn't it? If one person does that, then the family and the friends see that, and then the other people see that, and it all has a knock-on effect, right?
Yeah, you hope. And I think, I spent the first 6 months of this year, I was given a fellowship in Germany at the Robert Bosch Academy, which came out of the blue. I didn't apply for it. They just invited me. And it was the nicest thing that anybody's ever done for me, in the sense that they gave me time to sit and reflect and be self-reflective about what I've done, validate like what I have achieved, because when you're doing it, you half the time you think you're not doing well, right? Like, I always say this to people. I said, the minute you have kids, you will spend at least 15, 20 years of your life feeling inadequate in every sphere of your life. You're not looking after yourself well, you're not a good enough mother, you're not doing your job as well as you want. And to suddenly have the moment to just say, hang on, let me just have a few months where I can look back and rethink and think about the issues that I are now in my head. And I started going to the gym and all sorts of things I'd never done before. It was drinking water. I started drinking a liter of water a day. I was like, I've never done that.
Yeah, I've always got my trusty bottle of water.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to young women who aspire to become leaders in their fields and make a positive impact?
I think what advice I would say, get a foothold, be good at what you'd like, figure out what you are really good at and be excellent at it. And then learn how to work with other people. You're going to have to, sometimes we have to, you go into an institution. If I could advise my younger self, I would have said, be a bit more patient and learn how to manage upwards, because sometimes you get bosses that are complete fools, right? But they're your boss and you want them on your side. And so it's important to sort of understand how you build those relationships at the same time as how you work with your colleagues, at the same time as how you work with people who are supporting you. And so I try as hard as I can not to burn bridges ever. Maybe 2 or 3 people in my life that I've like, I just can't, but it takes me a long time. Because again, we're all human beings, and I genuinely try to practice the principle of give others the benefit of the doubt. Like, let's not assume something nefarious. It's actually, there's logic to it, but then sometimes there isn't, and sometimes there's no excuse. So it's like, you sort of learn about these things, but I think that know what you're really good at, be able to communicate it well, be able to do it. So I sometimes think if everything that I built, the organization had to disappear tomorrow, what am I still able to do? And I'm like, well, I can still write, and I can still teach, and I can still advise people, and I can still speak out. I can still organize and bring people around me, and so these are my skill sets.
The foundations, aren't they? The foundations, the skill set foundations.
Yeah. And nobody can take that away from you.
Right. That's it.
Yeah. And then try and work, try to surround yourself with people who have other skill sets, because that's the beauty, right? It's whether it's language, whether it's different ways of looking at things.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, you've got to, from your core, you have to know and sit back and be honest with yourself about why you're doing something at any given point.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just have to do it because it's a job and you need an income.
Yeah, and then there's other times where you can sit down and just reflect on those
Yeah.
moments. Yeah. So can you share some of your proudest moments and achievements as a peace builder or peace strategist, I should say now, a peace builder and activist?
What? Yeah, in that universe,
in that genre.
Proudest moments. So I think when I look at every 2 years we bring our network together, and this year we just had one of our gatherings. So there were about 100 of us from around the world, and I look out the room and see each of the women that I have known, and I've known many things about them, what they've gone through. We share personal stories, but I see them come together, and I see the love and the joy and the tears, and then you put the music on and people are dancing or laughing, or that makes me feel incredibly proud. It's creating a family community and being there in terms of solidarity for each other. And I'm proud of the fact that a lot of this is now happening without us or my having to be in the middle of it. It's like we've created the relationships that people, it's an ecosystem. So that I'm proud of. I look back and I think I'm proud of these strange moments when back in 1999, when we were trying to get the Security Council resolution, we had a conference at The Hague, and my colleagues reminded me that I said, yeah, if Al Gore can go to the Security Council, so can we. And fast forward, I'm in New York and I'm trying to talk to governments and so forth. And the Namibian foreign minister came to speak to a gathering of NGOs, of charities. And he said that if it hadn't been for the human rights organizations, he would never have been able to have independence in Namibia. And, something like that. And they were in the Security Council as a member at the time. And I chased after him. I literally, he left the room and I trotted after him. He was sitting and having his coffee. And I was like, excuse me, can we have a conversation, please? And that conversation enabled us to then have the other meetings that then opened the doors for us to then sort of say, okay, this is what we want, and start working with council members more effectively. Nice. And so it's, yeah, these strange times. I don't know. And then, I was involved in Nepal, going into a Maoist cantonment camp and being able to talk to people there and then bringing it back and having to share the stories with a Norwegian general who looked at me and he goes, have you been in the army? And I was like, no, but I think I was emulating the way he was sitting. I was like, okay, I have to pretend. So there are these just strange things that you've done, I don't know, I've done. But it's the Afghan work that we've done. My kids really, when I see what my children are doing, that's right. That's really kind of, and they've done it. I'm like, I'm not quite, I think I fed and watered and hugged them, but I'm not sure what else. I got out of their way a bit, probably.
Yeah, well, the kids obviously are a personal achievement, right?
Yeah. Book. Yeah, when I wrote my book, I was proud of that. The podcast, just like actually creating. Yeah. When I write, I'm really, that gives me the most joy. I should say. I think right. When you suddenly see a book out that you worked on, and the nights that you've spent time writing it and stuff. So those kinds of things.
Yeah. It's the little things, isn't it, in life that we take pleasure from and we're proud of. So let me ask you about the future. It's one of the last questions I have. What does a truly peaceful and just world look like to you, and what steps can we take to achieve it?
Oh, that's such a good question. I love it. A truly peaceful world is one where at every stage of life, as individuals and in our communities and in our society and state and then internationally, we have realized that violence is a choice, and that we may have disagreements, we may have disputes, serious disputes, valid disputes, right? But the choice of hitting someone, whether it's at home, whether it's your kid, your wife, your husband, your mother, your father, partner, that's a choice you make. It's a choice you can unmake. Same in your school, same in your community, same between states and governments right now. Every bullet, every missile, every drone is a choice that someone is making, and it's a choice that doesn't have to be made, because what we should be valuing and what we should be celebrating is the courage to be able to sit at a table and talk to each other, or the courage to be able to go out for a walk and say, what's your issue? What's my issue? Let's figure this out. And the humility to acknowledge that we can't all have everything, right? My rights and my humanity, my human rights stop the minute that they are impinging on your human rights.
Right.
And actually, there's plenty of space for all of us everywhere. There's everything. We have, the world has everything. But this idea that we celebrate violence all the time, it's in, in stories, and our heroes are the valiant soldiers.
We've come full circle, haven't we? Because that's how we first started, right? This chat today was about the video games and everything, and the superheroes, and it just is. It is about violence, isn't it?
Yeah. The idea that it's more president. If Iran right now decides not to retaliate against Israel, that it shows a sign of weakness. I'm like, no, it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of infinite rationality to say, I'm not gonna let you poke me so that you can come and destroy me, right?
Right.
These are the things that I think, or even when you think about the Israeli response to the Hamas attacks, it's like, if you step back and you think, after October 7th, there was a lot of sympathy for Israel. What happened was horrific. And Israel could have taken that moment to say, okay, what do we have to do for ourselves? And it is time to really negotiate about occupation and so forth. But also they could have shown that they were the state, that they were going to abide by the rules of international law and not go kill children and bomb hospitals, right? And out of anger and vengeance, they chose to do so. So there's a lot of this idea that we give credence to that. Well, first of all, we say men aren't emotional. They're very emotional. All this hitting and violence, I'm like, it comes from some emotion.
Yeah, it does.
Let's teach them something different.
Yeah.
But that a peaceful world, it's not that we deal with all the injustices. It's not that we are done with difficulties and inequalities. But if you take the violence out and you create the space for us to actually talk and figure ourselves out together, we release a lot more resources because we're spending so much on weapons right now. It's insane. Right?
War is money.
And B, it's just training people to think differently. And actually women are really good at that because we're not very good. We don't have the physical strength to be that violent. Violence is not a good strategy for us.
We'd rather talk. We'd rather sit down, have a cup of tea and talk about it. Right?
We not only that, we'll be really mean. We'll use our words to be really mean.
Yeah.
But to sort of punch out is just not a good tactic because most of us aren't physically like, that's not how. So it's actually looking at how we're hardwired and thinking about how we process and then saying, okay, how do we teach this across the board to children in societies? How do we celebrate the heroes that were peaceful? The men, the women, how do we tell the story of the world, not through the world wars and stuff, but through the story of how cocoa made it from South America to the Western world, or, cinnamon made it from wherever, or potato made. This is all part of human history or art, So the similarities rather than the differences, I think, is really important.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to finish with two questions I ask all my guests. If you could go back in time and give your younger self a single piece of advice, what would it be?
So I knew when I started in this line of work and I picked up the theme of working for women and peace building, I knew that I'd chosen the most difficult strand of work in my field. Like if I decided to work on business and conflict, it would have been probably easier. And I knew I was doing something really difficult. I think that probably what I would have advised myself is if you can write more to document, try to do more of that, or to try and do more storytelling in some space. And it's a tough one because I didn't, you know, if you publish in obscure academic journals, then you get recognized as an academic scholar. But I didn't want to just publish in academic journals because I was like 3 people read it, right? So we've tried to make our material more widely available. But I think that I would put a lot more emphasis on the storytelling, on bringing genuinely, like thinking about how you take the stories of these women and turn them into Netflix series, turn them into, you know, and actually that's part of what I hope to do in the next iteration of my existence, right? To say how do, you know, not in academic, jargony, boring ways, but in genuine, like human stories. I wish that we put more emphasis on that throughout our field in the last 25 years.
Well, human stories is the way we connect, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What message do you hope our female listeners will take away from your story today that will empower them on their own journey?
Just do it. Just be there. Do what you can. Don't be afraid. Follow your gut. Imagine the alternative. I've always believed in that. It's like, okay, so what? It doesn't exist. We create it. Einstein said that. Einstein said knowledge is limited, imagination is limitless. So, you know, create what you think needs to happen, and if you build it, people will come. You know, but excellence in what you do.
Excellence in what you do. Very nice.
And persevere. Persevere is also don't let people get you down.
No. Yeah. Ignore the naysayers.
Yes. Always ignore the naysayers. Yeah.
Very difficult to do, isn't it? But it's something we definitely need to do.
The other thing that I've learned over the years is that, you know, people will ask, what do you do? And I say, I work with women who become peace builders. And they'll say, oh, yes. And it's so important to work on child trafficking. Right. And when I was younger, I'd be like, yes, of course, you know, thinking that it's my job. And what I learned very quickly was to say, yes, that's really important. You should, if you're interested in this, why don't you go ahead and do something?
Right.
And then immediately, oh, well, that's not, you know, no, I can't do that. But this idea of you are not responsible for everything and anything in the world. Do your bit, keep the focus. Don't let the naysayers get at you. Don't let the skeptics and the cynics get at you. And surround yourself with really good friends. And be a good friend, you know, be there for each other.
Love that. Great. A million thanks to Sanam for joining me today. Thanks to our audience for hanging out with us. We hope you find it inspiring and empowering. And to find out more about myself or Sanam, you can find all the details below. And until next time, this is Beth and Sanam signing out.
Thank you.